what is a vulnerability? Like that question, genuinely, internally for your own organization, defining what is a vulnerability might be a challenging one. Join us as we discuss, because that's exactly what our internal team has had to tackle and define for us, and maybe even by extension of their capabilities for you. Join us as we discuss.
The main thing is you got to understand the architecture. Give me the ball.
But also, what is an asset? Just kidding. Tackle that question. You should know what an asset is by now. But I'm super excited for this episode. This is our second to last episode of the year. It's creeping up quick. I don't have any events to promote for you because it's December, and I wouldn't go either. So, just hang out at home. With that in mind, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, interact with us in the chat. I've got it open right here. You earn XP now. I don't know what you can do with the XP except for brag that you have XP. So go earn some XP in the chat, ask us questions. Really excited for this vulnerability conversation because I think things tend to get overblown. Maybe we tend to have trouble scoping our vulnerabilities. So without any further ado, let's jump right in.
Welcome. Ralph, welcome to the show. I'd love for you to introduce for people that don't know who you are, you and what your role is, and kind of, you set this conversation of what is a vulnerability, and maybe tell that story a little bit of the chalkboard and that conversation, man. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I'm Ralph Forsythe. I run security operations here at Pax8. I run our internal SecOps team. One of the many things that my team is responsible for is vuln management. So, essentially ensuring that we are not exposed to the things that are going to, hurt us in the middle of the night. You talked about what is a vulnerability, and about a year and a half ago or so, we tried to answer that question. So we got a bunch of smart people in a room, and basically just started with that question: what is a vulnerability? And what came out of that was this fairly elaborate Excel spreadsheet of all of the areas that we could have a vulnerability, all the ways that those could exist, and then what do we do about those things. So for example, in our cloud stack, that could be things like container images or configurations, cloud security posture, stuff like that, all the way down to the physical door badge readers in the office. Obviously, there's not an email server attached to that, but there are other vulnerabilities attached to that. Maybe the badges themselves aren't so great, right? So we really went through trying to assess, for each different thing that we care about, what will expose us tomorrow, and then how do we detect that exposure and then hopefully fix it.
Yeah, and I like to talk about, from the perspective of what is a vulnerability. Like, vulnerabilities are weaknesses, right? They're either poor configurations. They may have to be that way. There might be legacy reasons someone has a particular configuration. There are also vulnerabilities in the software itself, right? We see that in what we're going to talk about a lot here in a bit. And your world is the CVEs and CVSS. Well, we'll get to that, right? But you're trying to come up with this common, like, where are my weaknesses? And what are people exploiting? And that's the combination of threat intelligence by comparison to vulnerabilities, right? Anything you want to add to that, Dom or Ralph?
No, I think that it's frustrating how often I would walk into an environment and see something and not like it, but realize it's just how it is, right? And I think there's a lot of value in being able to accept that and find alternative paths to remediate or to protect.
Yeah, we talk about compensating controls a lot. We wish we could have perfectly secure environments, but those don't actually exist. Anybody who says they're 100% secure is definitely trying to sell you something. But that doesn't mean that you have to just accept all that risk blindly, right? So maybe you can't patch that problem. Maybe that config has to exist for a reason. But there are other things you can wrap around that to, hopefully mitigate that risk or even eliminate it entirely.
Yeah. And then that brings me to a discussion around, what is a threat? And I tell the same analogy. I think I've done it on this show before, but Jeff Mann and I were sitting there discussing, the misuse of words by vendors in a lot of cases. And threats are kinetic things, as kind of we came to it, right? In the sense that I might be vulnerable to bullets. I'm a human. I have a big bag of flesh, right? But just because I'm near a bullet doesn't necessarily mean I have a threat near me, right? A threat would be someone picking up a bullet and then pointing a gun at me, putting the bullet in and shooting at me, right? So there's these components that have to exist and they're kinetic actions. So threats and threat actors might exist in absence of, and also vulnerabilities might exist in absence of a threat actor, right? And so that, just calling out the concept that a threat takes advantage of weaknesses and vulnerabilities, but a vulnerability could exist and not necessarily have somebody have attacking it. Usually on unknown things, that's the way it works, right? We don't know about 0 days until they happen, and then they happen, and then we have to change. Anyway, sorry to go off on a side tangent.
That also, I just had this is not the first time we've discussed this on the show, I'm pretty sure, but I also just had the epiphany that if we follow that logic, it is impossible to put hacker and threat actor in the same category, right?
Thank you. Did we just prove a universal theorem? Like Chris Roberts would roll over in his grave. He's not dead yet, but he would definitely roll over in his grave on this one.
He will roll over in his seat on a Boeing somewhere, yes.
So, Ralph, tell me a little bit about the things you're having to deal with, more into what is a vulnerability. I think we talked about you could misconfigure to create a vulnerability, but let's focus on the other ones where they follow that traditional path, as do 40 or 50,000 a year happen this way, the CVEs.
Yeah, I mean, most of those are sometimes they are configuration. There's some
Sure.
pretty interesting CVEs that came out over the last year that actually were configuration problems that were being exploited, and that turned into like everybody go patch your stuff right now. More often than not, it's just a software vulnerability, like your Windows patch Tuesday, right? We just had patch Tuesday, and they released a bunch of stuff. Browsers, right? Always patch your browsers because like every week there's something new coming out with your favorite web browser. Doesn't matter which one it is. Those are really just by volume the ones we deal with the most, right? It's
right.
The systems that you use day in and day out, they will become vulnerable usually quickly, and you have to keep up with that.
Well, and I think it's also important because we see patterns, and people tend to start complaining about one company or another. There's always a new Windows vulnerability. Well, yeah, because most of the world uses Windows, so most of the resources to attack an operating system are focused on Windows, right? So it's something to bear in mind. Just because you don't hear about a particular vendor all the time doesn't mean they're secure. And just because you do hear about another vendor all the time doesn't mean they really suck. Although in some cases it does, and I won't name drop here, but you should definitely validate SAML signatures, though.
Yeah, and here at Pax8, I mean, we actually monitor the security feeds for many of the vendors that we use and sell, just because we want to know when they're vulnerable. Some of them are very infrequent. Some products we've actually never seen a vulnerability announced on. Others, it's 20 a week. Not naming names, but to your point, when a product is used by hundreds of millions of people, they're a target, and stuff's going to be found.
I want to dig into that statement, period. I mean, just first off, like we constantly look into and look for vulnerabilities in the tools and systems we use. I think that's like a baseline table stakes that has to exist in an organization for effective vulnerability management. You have to know what you use, which means you have to have an effective underlying, control 2 for software inventory. You have to have an effective control 3 for data, control 1 for asset inventory. All three of those have to be in place. But then you have to be monitoring for those things to have, some intelligence about the vulnerability landscape that you have and exists. Yeah. And there's scoring systems for that, right, Ralph? Like I want to explain this as if there's, my grandfather kind of listening to this a bit, but tell me about the current scoring systems and what those structures are like right now and how you prioritize something when there's this many vulnerabilities.
Yeah, vulns exist in a database, right? So you have the CVE, which is kind of where they all sort of exist in to begin with. It's just kind of like a dictionary of all the vulns that exist, and it gets populated pretty much constantly with all the new stuff coming out. And then there's the National Vuln Database, or NVD, which builds on that and starts adding things like scoring and context. And the NVD gives a lot of really good information about what this thing is, and sometimes why you should care. When we get into scoring, there's CVSS, Common Vuln Scoring System. So I think the important thing there is it doesn't provide risk. It doesn't tell you how risky this vuln is. It just tries to provide sort of a qualitative rating of severity of that vulnerability. So it's rating, I think from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, 10 being the worst. 10 is like, you might see that vuln come through as a 10, and it's like, wrath of God, Old Testament, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Like, just take a breath, right? Like it might come through as a 9.5, but it's just one number, right? Take it in context. Building on CVSS, there's also this EPSS, or Exploit Prediction Scoring System, I think is what that stands for.
Yep.
And where that tries to go is try to figure out the probability of that vuln actually being exploited. And so their numbers are a little
Sure.
bit different,
Right.
but they're trying to make kind of a swag that it might impact you if you have this software installed. They're looking at things like whether there are actually exploits available. Like just because a vuln exists doesn't mean that anybody's actually doing anything with it. In which case, the
Yep.
risk is pretty low because nobody knows how to exploit it in the first place.
Yeah.
Obviously the CVSS is going to factor into that. If it's a CVSS with 1 and it's like super low impact and like even if you got hacked, it doesn't matter. That one's not going to rate very high. But if it's a 10 and there's exploits available, that's probably something you should start paying attention to, like
Sure.
today, right? So
Yeah. Agreed.
yeah.
And impact is a real thing to think about, right? Like how long was scattered
Yes.
spider in the fabric of the telecom infrastructure, but we were still to make phone calls, send text messages. I mean, they were all being read, which is what it is, but like it didn't break anything, right? Which
Yeah.
is an interesting thing to think about.
And not breaking doesn't mean not scary or bad, right? Like
Right.
like just because your system is running doesn't mean your data hasn't just like left the chat entirely. Right?
Again,
So,
they were reading said text messages, so that is an
yes,
issue.
exactly.
Yes.
Right. So impact can mean your systems are down. Impact could mean your competitors just got all of your data and you're not a company anymore. Right. So think about all those things.
Well, now you've kind of talked about the maturity, or at least trying to mature the contextual value of a 10. Like a 10 means it's a remote code execution that requires unauthentication, non-authenticated. Like, okay, I can run code on a system without authentication. Like that's bad. Maybe.
Yeah.
If it's a honey trap, I don't care. Like I just want to see what they did and capture that code and look for it in other places, right? If it's the crown jewels, pun intended, since the recent theft, I'm going to keep beating that thing until I can't. But like I think then it matters more, and so I think that's the question I'd ask. Like, what goes into making those risk-based impact kind of decisions for us? Like, how do you think about approaching that if you're teaching an MSP? How do you think about that impact versus that perfect 10? First, you said take a breath. What's next?
Stop and breathe. Like it looks scary, but it may not be. And on the other hand, sometimes things don't look very scary and they're actually a pretty big deal. So that context matters. Like you said, if it's a honeypot or some system that doesn't do anything, maybe it's not as big of a deal. If it's where you have all your financial information or your intellectual property or all of your employee PII or whatever, right? That's a big deal. You need to protect that stuff. CVSS and EPSS scores, they're in isolation. They're just like this vuln exists on its own with nothing else wrapped around it, and they try to give a numerical kind of mathy kind of score to it. But they don't know your business. They don't know what security controls you have in place. So stop and ask yourself some questions, right? Like if the vuln requires network access to this system and you have ACLs wrapped around it, just a basic network firewall even in the cloud, right? Maybe that mitigates it enough that you probably should still patch it, but it's not a page everybody out at 8 p.m. on a Friday kind of problem.
That's right.
Also on your endpoints as well, hopefully you run EDR software on your endpoints. Those can provide firewalls and detections as well. We do catch things even here at Pax8 where the EDR stops the attack before it can progress past the most basic of steps, right? And that's a mitigating control. Like, yeah, we need to patch it, but we know that we're detecting it, and that's a big plus for us. Things that require users to authenticate first. Well, your average remote attacker may not have the authentication credentials in the first place. So if they have to be logged into the software as an admin or something like that, it's important. But is it like, again, are you going to page somebody out in the middle of the night for this thing? Probably not, right? On the other hand, if your network's wide open and they can get to this thing, like you said, that RCE that's like they can just pop your system just by it existing, that's bad, right? Think about how many people are affected. If it's if like one person has this software out of a company of 2,000 or 5,000 or whatever, you should go patch their host, but that one person would have to be targeted. On the other hand, if it's every host in your environment, like browser vulns are a big one for us and for every company, right? Because Chrome, of course, Chrome and Firefox and all these browsers always have vulns, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So like when there's some critical Chrome vulnerability, we want everybody to patch right now. Like go restart your browser and let it update because that can impact your whole business. You don't know who's going to be hit, right?
I want to pause and call out a couple.
5 hours notice when that happens.
I know,
right?
On
top of that.
Y'all are on top of it. I want to call out a couple things that were just brought up for context for people. One is the severity. Like, how risky is it? Is it my crown jewels, or is it a honeypot or a trap or something I just put out there for that purpose? That's the first piece, the quantification of our scoring system, right? Is like, how important is it that we're talking about? The second piece that was kind of called out was how much is it? Like, how many are there? If I have one system that's run by Matt Lee that has this ancient dongle that's used to make that steel cutter measure steel, the likelihood of that getting attacked by proxy of the number of humans in the environment is small, but I need to put controls only for Billy that runs that, not controls for the entirety to offset that, right? So we can be more focused. So it's quantity, right? And then severity are two of the context pieces you've brought up so far that come into that. The other things
Yeah.
I'll point to real quick are, like, in order to do that well, there are quite a few CIS controls that need to exist for you. You have to have 1.1 for the asset inventory, 2.1 for software inventory, 3.2 for a data inventory. You need data maps that come in later parts of 3. You need network maps in later parts of 12, right, and 13. The other thing I want to come back to, just now that I've done my little recap, is you talked about detection and how quickly we're going to detect. And you talked about detect and respond, containment, like those things. Can you speak towards like that part of the thought process when it comes to vulnerabilities and risk in that regard?
Uh, yeah, I mean, detection wise, lots of ways to detect vulns. The old school way where, plug in a network scanner and like you'd hit your website and
Yeah.
see if it was vulnerable to this thing. And those still exist. Those tools are still out there. I would encourage people to step beyond that. Are much more modern ways to go see what you have in your environment. We use some of them here at Pax8. Some we sell, some we don't. But a good EDR tool. We use Microsoft here, but there are many other good ones out there. Do a really good job of taking inventory of all the things on your assets and telling you,
Yep.
you have this version that's exposed. Like, when a browser vuln comes out, we can see right in our Defender portal that thing light
Spike.
up with Chrome vulns, and I can see every user. I can see what version they're on. I can see how they're exposed. We then apply risk context to that. So if you're a sensitive user, if you're like the CEO and you're exposed to all this critical nasty stuff, I might want to patch your system sooner than other
Yeah.
folks, right? So we have the ability to do that. In the cloud, we use CSPM tools to actually look at the packages that are installed, the images that we're running, also the
Yep.
configurations that exist. A lot of the vulns that we detect are what I would call runtime security problems. So somebody just exposed a cloud data bucket publicly, or there's an API key landing somewhere, or other just weird stuff that happens in Amazon that as an admin you're not even looking for that, but we have tools that can detect it, flag it, and alarm to us and say, hey, somebody just went and did this, and you need to go lock it down now before you get hacked. Right? So,
I'll give you a similar example in a vulnerability for an MSP, right? And this will bring us to what your mission is as well. And I want to tackle this. But like another example as an MSP is if you aren't using device code flow for your world, then a vulnerability that exists is device code attacks like graph runner, social engineering attacks, where I establish and maintain a primary refresh token for that identity through a remote attack by having them go to device code login on Microsoft, right?
I love
Microsoft.com/device
how you
log.
made that sound like a framework control. Establish and maintain a primary access token.
Yeah, I did make it sound like I made my bad guy framework, Dom. You're not wrong. But like I would want to do that, and I could do that in that way. Well, then why would you not just put in a removal of that front end vulnerability by putting in a conditional access that blocks that for your users unless they
right.
need it, right? And so it's to that
Yeah.
point when you talk about CSPM or cloud security posture management, that typically focuses, in my opinion, way more on containers and produced code and CI/CD pipelines and architecture in that way. But think about it for
Yeah.
you as an MSP around like how you manage your Microsoft tenant. How do you scale the vulnerabilities that exist in a native Microsoft tenant to put in and prevent against that? Like, can users register enterprise apps or not? That's a vulnerability that exists by default by
Yeah.
configuration if you have it that way. And so, like, those are the thoughts I want to make
Well,
sure
and
people
this
aren't
has
missing
gotten
when it comes to
easier.
your surface area. Yeah, sorry, Tom.
And this has gotten easier over the years in like the pure enterprise space. Like Pax8, obviously, we have a platform and more than a few users use that platform and more than a few
One or
developers build on it.
20,000, 30,000,
But
40,000, yeah, something like
um,
that.
it's a lot, right?
Yeah,
But
a
your
ton.
typical SMB customer doesn't have that, right? And the
That's right.
beauty, what really does come from the NVD and from like Microsoft's teams is I know that if I run Windows 11 and it is this build number, it is unpatched from this CVE. And that's
That's
where
right.
really good insights can come out of Defender or from any other sort of vuln management tool. I'm not actively trying to exploit that. I just know that you haven't patched. So across like not most, a lot of commercial off the shelf tools that SMBs are going to buy, it's pretty manageable so long as you're using a tool and then acting on that data and making smart decisions.
Well, let's get into that. And this is what I wanted to tackle.
Yeah.
I am not in charge of the GTIA ISAL, Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. For anybody that's not familiar with the term ISAL, it's kind of a sister to ISACs, or Information Sharing and Analysis Coalitions, I think it's the answer.
Centers.
Anyways, I may be wrong. Center. I might be terribly stupid. But on ISAL, one of the challenges is that, and we were discussing this kind of nuancedly with the Cybersecurity Executive Council for GTIA, was like, we could put all the threat intelligence in that we want for MSPs, but if MSPs A, aren't demanding it, and B, aren't being able to take action upon those things, then it's useless. And the argument was that more vendors need to step into the ISAL, more vendors need to give and take and give distilled information that's actionable by MSPs. But then you and I met and talked about this, Ralph. Like, and I want you to touch a bit on what you're charged with doing, a little bit about our threat analysis that we're doing, and how we try to contextualize that for MSPs. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Definitely. Threat intel is one of the other things that my team does, and I think it's good to distinguish threat intelligence from vuln detection, because they're really two related but distinct things, right? So, where vulns are about detecting the active security hole in your system, like your software's out of date, or your config is horrible, or somebody just went and like exposed a bucket or whatever. The intelligence is more about understanding the unique risks facing your company. So it's not that you're unpatched in the software; it's that people are actively going after those kinds of holes, right? So,
Yeah.
Here at Pax8, sometimes we will hear about groups targeting the IT or MSP industries, right? That's the intelligence we specifically go and look for. Possibly even more specific verticals that our partners serve, which are hundreds or thousands of different industry verticals that we could get into, and so we don't drill into every single one of those. But we can actually target the risks by the kind of company that they're targeting, or the specific geographical regions that they're in, even the systems that you run. Sometimes that threat intel is about the products and how they're being targeted. We've seen threat intel that popular backup or IT products are being actively exploited. Again, that's not the vuln detection. It's not me going into your environment and saying, "Oh, your backup product is exposed to this version," or whatever. But we know that if you're a target, because people are going to find you. They're going to steal your files or lock you out, or ransomware your systems or whatever, right? So, we're looking for that. We're also looking for MSP specific threat intel around things like RMM tools. Those are it's really popular target for threat actors.
I want to make a bit of a kind of an analogy for people about threat intelligence, right? Anybody ever played high school football or soccer or basketball or baseball or lacrosse or whatever it might be at a high level, you've had to do game film. Right? Like, I don't know if has that escaped anybody in their sports days of doing some form of game film review about a team you're about to play, right? Like, okay, if you've made it to any level. And so the point is, like, when you review game film, you're looking for one thing. You know, like, what do they do? Like, do these guys like to pass? Do they like to run right there in the 1 and 2 hole a lot? Do they do a lot of these options plays? And the reason is I can practice all I want at great conditional access on the front end of identity for user sign-ins when it comes to cloud applications, and not realize that someone's actually punching holes in social engineering on the front end of support desks as an attack. Like, if I focus on the one thing, it doesn't matter if I'm not looking at what people are actually doing. And so I like to make threat intelligence a lot more about game film. And just like anybody else, the better the coach and the better the player, the better they interpret the game film. And that's what I want to speak towards. I feel like Pax8's taken a bit of a role to try to interpret game film and then digest things down to our partners in ways that these players can take action and make changes and cover the 2 hole a little more instead of the 3, right? Or 4 or whatever, right? Anyways.
Yeah. I like the game analogy. That's good. I think it's important to be watching the right game too. Like, if you're a football team, you're not going to be watching game film from lacrosse or something. But if you don't know how to filter threat intelligence, that's what happens, right? It's
Agreed.
like a fire hose of information. Like, how do you wade through that stuff? We've tackled that problem here. We've actually spent, I think, about a year now just writing custom software. We have some of it's AI based, some of it's just other more intelligence that we've wrapped in there. But we have sources that essentially feed us intel from hundreds of sources. We monitor all these vendors, we monitor free feeds and hacker news sources and all that kind of stuff. If it's if hospitals are being attacked, I don't care about that necessarily for an IT company, right? Our partners might if they serve a hospital, and that's something that if that's what you do, you should look into. But one of our, I think, strong points with threat intel is that we can distill that information down to just the stuff we care about. So we're only watching for the game film, aimed at that football team, right?
Yep, exactly.
And then what we're doing with that is we take the really critical stuff that might be impacting a large population of Pax8 partners, and we give it to you for free. So when my team spots one of these things, we issue what's called a Partner Security Intelligence Bulletin, or PSI. We push that right to the marketplace. So once you authenticate as a Pax8 partner, log in with your username and password, that will appear as an alert right at the top of the page. And so when
Pause.
there's some, yeah,
Real quick, I want to tackle
Yeah.
authenticate and why that matters so much. One of the reasons ISALs exist, the reason ISACs exist, the reason that we're doing this to an authenticated populace is as long as you KYC and know your customer and release information, we're likely not giving intel to threat actors about threat actors' actions and what we know about them, right? And so I just want to tackle the fact that it's that authenticating first. Continue. Sorry, man. I just wanted to cover that.
Yeah, we don't want to give an advantage to the attacker. And just to be clear, we're not giving you anything that isn't already public information. Like we
Sure.
don't have some secret in with all these companies, and we know the vulns before everybody else does. That would be really cool, but we don't do that. But what we do with these intel bulletins, if you've ever read legit security threat intel, it's about 10 pages of security jargon and IOCs and
IOCs and
screenshots of
TTPs and
code.
YARA
It's-
rules.
Yeah, it's deep, right? And if you're an MSP trying to protect your customer, you don't care about that, and we know that. So what my team does is we take all of that and basically distill it down to, here's the vulnerability or the thing that you should care about. Here's how you patch this or reconfigure something right now today. And there's a screenshot of one of those bulletins that we issued on some products recently. And basically make it super straightforward, super actionable, just the information you need as an MSP to go help your customers be safe, which is great for everybody, right? So that's the intent of this program.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to tackle that. If you're an MSP, raise your hand in the room if you have an internal threat intel management team, or even a head count, or even a hat assigned to a portion of a head count. My gut says there's not very many hands up, and if you are, you're probably a platform player. And my point is like, I love what Pax8's doing here. I love what we're doing at the ISAL. I love what's being done in this world of trying to distill all this data that's just pager fatigue into, hey, this matters to you. Guess what? If you're an enable and they had this vulnerability, you need to make sure this is done. In some ways, we're just echoing and amplifying, but in a lot of ways, we're removing noise. And we're putting our intelligence humans into that research. And I've even had you come to me, or several people in your team come to me and go, Matt, is this relevant to the MSPs that we serve today? No, I don't think so.
Same.
Great. Awesome. Thought so. Same. Dom as well. So if you're not subscribing to these feeds as an owner, I think you should be, if nothing else, but the executive briefing and awareness of your own situation around you. We're towards the end of the show. Ralph, I'd love to give you any closing words or thoughts that you'd like to add for the MSP populace that you're kind of serving in that role. I mean, it's a cool role.
Yeah, I mean, the cool part about our threat intel is you don't actually have to subscribe. It just shows up in the marketplace. We don't do it very often, so when one of those pops up, you should definitely pay attention, because we're really only putting those out there for the super important stuff. If you're an MSP, I encourage you to subscribe to RSS feeds or security pages, announcement pages, whatever, for the products that you sell. It's going to be a little bit noisy, but you will find out about things maybe more quickly and be able to protect your customers. And then, of course, they're going to want to buy more stuff from you because you kept them safe. So it's all good.
Awesome. Dom, anything to close out with before we head off to play the game?
I think we pretty much nailed it, but I think the beauty of our program at Pax8 is it really is giving you this distilled thing. And if Ralph's team has put it out, you need to pay attention to it, right? And not everyone is going to be relevant to you, but everyone is going to be relevant to a non-zero number of our partners. But it is also worth, looking at other threat feeds, especially if you're trying to be a practitioner and trying to get better at this. Look at other people's game film, right? Understand what other things are happening, whether or not they're relevant to you. There's a ton of learning and just understanding how, CISA puts together a KEV alert with some wacky IOC, learning about that IOC and those TTPs and how these things work. That'll help you as a practitioner. But these are designed to help you as an MSP actually get work done. Ralph, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is great. Log into Pax8, see if you've got any. You don't. Spoiler alert. But log into Pax8 and check.
There's nothing there right now, but that could change.
Right.
It
could change. Right.
Hopefully, it doesn't change.
Matt, let's do the play of the game.
something that is a weakness, right? Something that is going to be a problem if someone exploited that. What is a threat? A threat is someone exploiting that weakness. What is a threat actor? Someone that is doing that, right? But I think the key takeaway is if you don't have a threat feed, you probably are consuming one in some way. You're consuming one from the perspective of your MDR vendors that are doing work on your behalf. You are in some of those things, but you should take advantage of those available to you. If you are a member of GTIA, you should definitely go take advantage of and sign up for access to the ISAL, where you get distilled information from a lot of these paid threat feeds directly in your source, directly in front of your face, in a platform that allows you to share intelligence. And I think maybe that's the last piece I'll close with. When you get punched in the face, share information about how you're being punched in the face. Participation in these threat feeds and ISALs is not one directional, it can be bi-directional, and share that information in ways that make sense.
Game over.
I love that takeaway. You're only on an island if you choose to put yourself on an island, right? If you participate in these communities, we can all help each other, and this is a combined mission. We're postulating on 2026 predictions, and I used big cuss words because I'm not sure where it's going to go. But if you want to find out where I think it's going to go and where Matt thinks it's going to go, join us next week. It'll be the last show of the year, and that's our classic 2026 predictions show, and then we're going to close it out for the year. So we'll see you next week one more time in 2025, same time, same place.